First thing we want to do is to create 2 lengths of I-cord, one in red and one in white. If you know how to do this already, then feel free to skip to a later part of the video. I've made the I-cord lengths around 16 centimetres as I felt that was a fairly good length to create the nice shape, but feel free to make it slightly longer or slightly shorter if you'd prefer. The knitting mill that I'm using is a Prim knitting mill, not because I think it's the best, it's just the one that I have. It does the job perfectly fine as long as you are using a yarn that is not too thick. I find that if you use a thicker yarn, it does tend to get caught in not knit properly. Make sure that you hang the weight onto the bottom of the I-cord as it's knitted and ensure that it is dropped off of the table so that it pulls the I-cord down and knits properly. Another really useful thing to bear in mind is to make sure that you haven't got any excess tension in your ball of wool. I did keep forgetting to have some slack there coming from the ball, so as you can see, every now and then I'm having to free some yarn to stop the tension becoming too tight. Make sure that when you're measuring the length of your I-cord, you do not have it under tension, as that will affect the height of the I-cord. So I rest the weight on the table in order to allow the I-cord to relax to its proper length when I measure. Once the I-cord is at the right length, I just snip the end of the yarn and keep turning the handle, and it will just fall out of the machine. And then you'll be left with the 4 little loops which you need to sew the ends through to stop it coming unravelled. So I literally use a knitting needle or a large darning needle to pick up the loops, thread the end of the yarn onto it and sew that through the 4 loops to secure them. And then I like to go back one more time and then lose the end inside the work. And then I'll do the same thing at the other end to ensure that there are no loose yarn threads. You could make these candy canes in different colourways. I just prefer the traditional red and white, and I decided to hang mine on my tree, but they'd also look really lovely if you put them onto a little garland. They'd make some really nice decorations around the house. The next step is I take some beading wire and I bend the ends over and tape them with a little masking tape to stop them being too sharp, as it's quite a fine wire that I'm using. I have tried also with a thicker wire, but I find that I prefer the flexibility of the beading wire. So I tape one end and then I feed this through the I-cord all the way to the far end. This can take a little bit of manipulating, as the wire is quite thin, so it can bend easily, but with a little bit of manoeuvring and perseverance, it does get through okay. This part is actually easier with the slightly thicker wire, as it doesn't bend so easily, but I do prefer the way that it easily bends for the next step, so I ploughed on with it for this part. Once the wire is in place, I bend the other end to the right size, and I'm just trimming that off because it's a little bit longer than I wanted it to be, and then I tape that end as well. And then all you need to do is push that into the I-cord and slip the I-cord over the top of it to conceal the wire. Putting tape on the ends just helps it stay a bit more secure in the ends and helps prevent it from poking through too easily. Once the red I-cord is complete, I create another one using the white yarn. After I've finished wiring both I-cords, I begin twisting them together, starting at the base. I try and get a really tight twist at the base, as this does tend to come undone slightly, but this isn't the end of the world, as it will be stitched in a minute. If you keep the V shape either side of where the twist is happening, then the twist tends to happen a lot more evenly and both I cords are twisted at an even spacing. Using the beading wire, this is actually quite easy to manipulate tighter or looser twists in individual areas as well, so it's very forgiving. So once I've finished twisting it, I do go back and just adjust the tightness of some of the twists to try and make them a little bit more even before I stitch the ends into place. When securing either end of the I-cords together, I tend to use a clear thread, as I prefer not being able to really see the stitches. It's basically like a very fine fishing wire or beading wire, but made of clear plastic, and it's very easy to use to stitch the ends together. The only thing to bear in mind is that as it's plastic, it is quite slippery, so I tend to tie a knot in the end and then secure it into itself once I've threaded it through. So I thread it through there and then I'll push it back through in between the two strands to secure it against its own knot. Then I just work a few stitches in between the twists and ensure that I've got the tight twists at the end that I want, and just putting a few little stitches backwards and forwards on the inside helps them all to stay into place. Once I'm happy with how secure the I-cords are at the end, I'll tie it off and lose some of the end inside the work, and then I'll repeat the process at the other end of the I-cord to secure that end too. This can be a little bit fiddly, but it is worth this extra step as it gives you a really secure, neat end to the candy canes, so it really does affect the finished product. As you can see, the clear thread is a really good choice, as you really can't see any of the stitches that I've made, and the yarn does tend to sort of hold it into place and make it less visible. Once the ends are stitched, all that is left is to bend the top over from about half to maybe a third of the way from the end and hook it into a nice arch shape to create your candy cane. You can play around with it a little bit more as it's very flexible. You can create exact the shape that you like, but if you use a thicker wire, this is a little bit more difficult. And there's your candy cane ready to hang on the tree. You could create hanging loops at the tops of these if you'd prefer them to be dangling, or you can just leave them as they are. I like to use them as they are, as I find they sit quite nicely on the tree branches. Or you could put little bows on them as well if you wanted to make them even cuter. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have, please like this video and subscribe to my channel to keep up to date with new videos. Thanks for watching.